We have a couple minutes here before 6 o'clock. We're going to start promptly at 6 o'clock so I can get you out of here. Let me make sure that I have my time set so that I don't do uh, too much, but just enough, to help you guys get through some of the challenges that you've been experiencing when it comes to grief and loss. I'm also going to turn on another monitor up here. All right. We'll give it just a few more seconds. Hello, hello, hello. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Mwah, mwah. I'm going to wait right until 6 o'clock to see who else joins us, okay? Do you have an email address? If you have an email address, go ahead and drop your email address in. Hit the like and share button as well. Can you hear me okay? All right, it is officially 6 o'clock, and I want to stay present and on time. If you are just joining, I know that people are going to come in, they're going to enter as we're going through some things, but I want you to hit your like button and hit your share button. I also want you to mute yourself, and I want you to also put your email address in. That's very important. Please put your email address in the chat section, and then also what state you're in. That would be really, really helpful, because as we go down the line with this, I'm going to have some great things coming down the line for us, okay? And you do want to be in on this, on these great things that are going to happen here. First and foremost, let me introduce myself. I am Shelley Jordan, and I am a licensed professional therapist. I practice in the state of Virginia and New York, and currently in the process of being licensed in California because of the devastations that they are having there. And just giving somebody an opportunity to be heard is really important. Again, I want to remind you to like and share this video. Put your email address in the chat section and tell me what state you are in. All right. So let's just go ahead and get started. Over the last couple of weeks, all I've done was talked about grief and loss. I've talked about creating intimate relationships. I've talked about cherishing memories. And so let's just talk about grief and loss for a minute, because before we can get into creating intimate relationships and cherished moments, we really need to understand what grief and loss is. And so, grief and loss really is, when you talk about a definition of grief and loss, it really is an emotional response to a loss. It's an emotional response that we have to a loss. It can be a psychological and or a physical effect that we have. And when we talk about psychological, we're just basically talking about the mind. We're talking about the mental and emotional state of a person when we talk about psychological. And when we talk about physical effects, and I talk fast, y'all know that I'm a fast talker. So you're going to have to rewind it and listen to it again, okay? Just to get it all. And so when we talk about physical effects, grief and loss can affect the physical body in so many ways. As I was studying for this and doing the research for this, you know what? It is amazing the symptoms that grief and loss can take on a physical body. Um, so fatigue being one. You can be worn down as a result of a loss. You can have pain, digestive issues, sleep disturbances, anxiety, chest pain. Your immune system can change. Your heart issues. You can even begin to have heart issues. And so before I actually go any further, I lost my train of thought about what I was going to say. But anyway, other physical signs: dizziness, numbness, tension, unexplained aches and pains, difficulty swallowing, a racing mind. All of these are physical effects that we can have as a result of grief and loss. And I don't know that we even take time to really think about it. And then this is what I was going to back up and say, but it's really my next point. When we talk about grief and loss, let's just talk about loss in general. Sometimes when we think about grief and loss, we think of the loss of a loved one, which is primarily what we all know. But grief and loss can come in so many other ways than death. It can be in the form of a breakup. It can be in the form of personal identity, just losing your identity. You can grieve that. um, a quick testimony. I remember, it doesn't have to be anybody dying, but it can be somebody you're separated from. I remember years ago, I had a favorite cousin, and I used to hang out with this cousin all the time. I mean, we were like two peas in a pod for real. You couldn't tell us apart for real. And when I had to separate myself from this cousin because we were just no longer good for each other, we was just as worldly as we want to be. Uh, but God knows, right? He knew that this day would come, and I pray her day is here too. But we were so worldly. But when I separated from her, I literally went through the stages of grief that we're going to get into. But there was a grief and loss process that I went through because somebody that I was with every single day in and day out for almost 2 to 3 to 4 years, that person was no longer in my life. And I literally grieved the loss of that cousin. And it was painful. I mean, painful. So when we think about loss, it doesn't necessarily mean a death, although that is typically what people understand grief and loss to be. And so I think of the loss of pictures. I remember I lost some sentimental pictures. I remember losing a Bible that my grandmother had given me, and her words to me was, "This is my eternal gift to you." Being the clown that I was back in the day, I lost my grandmother's Bible that she gave me. Lord, if y'all, anybody on here can do some kind of research to help locate that Bible. I was in the great state of Illinois, Decatur, Illinois, matter of fact. And so if y'all can find my Bible, it has my name written in it. I was Shelley Graynet at the time. So find that Bible for me, y'all. Y'all, call the right people. People locate stuff like this all the time. Okay, I ain't going down that rabbit hole. I'm done with that, but find my Bible. Anyway, I want to talk about too that when we talk about a loss, it really impacts the life of an individual. You remember me talking about over the last couple of weeks that there is grief, I mean, acute grief that we go through. This is the initial stage of grief that we go through when we lose someone or something. And I want to be sure to add the something because it's not all the time a physical death. It is either a person, a thing, a breakup, a situation, something sentimental. I mean, all of the things. Uh, anyway, acute grief we talked about, and that's over several months, the loss of a loved one or something where you experience symptoms that I named earlier, which is somewhat similar: shock, feelings of shock, numbness, intense distress that could last anywhere from 20 minutes to 60 minutes. Physical and emotional discomfort does it cause? Shortness of breath, tightness in your throat, sleep difficulties, loss of appetite, restlessness, guilt associated with the loss, intense sadness, poor concentration. All of these things happen in the stage of acute grief, right? Okay. But the thing about acute grief is that it is really considered a normal part of a grieving process, and it does not stand alone for a diagnosis. Being a therapist, it does not stand alone as a diagnosis. However, it could take professional clinical judgment to determine its severity. There are moments of happiness also when it comes to acute grief. Acute grief, eventually it begins to subside. Acute, the word acute just means a short period of time. So that means that it really do begin to subside organically. It's nothing that you're doing. It's nothing that you can do. It just organically begin to subside. It loses some of its intensity, and you'll see the symptoms that we talked about earlier. They will begin to become less and less. Okay, that's acute grief. Integrated grief says that during this season of integrated grief, normal activities are increasing as the pain is less frequent. Okay. And so you still miss your loved one or you still miss the thing. However, it hasn't fully gone away, but you've learned how to integrate the loss into this life that you have to now live. And two things can be true at this stage, and that is the acknowledgement of the loss and the life without the person or the life without the thing. Okay. Um, there are many times where you can fall back into acute grief, and that's typically triggered by holidays, birthdays. Um, when this happens, you just need to understand that it's a normal part of the process. And so I mentioned holidays and birthdays. Is there anything else that you can think of that would also be an acute grief or integrated grief um, trigger? If you can think of one, just put it in the chat. We're going to come back to them and just take a look at them, read them out. Here's some examples that I come up with. There could be a song, there could be a TV show that you're watching, there could be something that someone says. It can even be a smell in the air that could really trigger you to go back or fall back into your acute state, your acute grief. Sometimes many individuals live in this state. It's a permanent state for them. Um, because here's the thing: heartache is forever at this stage. You never stop missing the person, but the difference is the grief is not debilitating, meaning the grief is not impacting your functioning to where you can't do the things that you normally need to do for yourself, bathing, cooking, cleaning, because sometimes grief and loss is so severe, it does debilitate where we're unable to do those things. There's a sense of loss and the reality of the loss when you're in this stage as well. So then we move on. I talked about complicated grief, right? And this is where a person fails to move forward from acute grief to integrated grief. You know, they cycle back to the acute grief state and experience all of those symptoms all over again. The memories of the loss of the loved one or the thing are frequent, it's severely painful. And again, there's that word is debilitating, where they aren't able to wash dishes, they aren't able to bathe, they're very depressed, they want to stay in the bed, and all of those things that keep them from functioning effectively day to day. At this point, again, your daily functioning is affected. Um, what are the associations with complicated grief? The associations are shame of their grief. Many people are ashamed that they are still grieving. They're questioning why they haven't moved on. They're really struggling to enjoy their life. They're struggling to overcome grief, and they feel that if they have any sense of happiness, that they are betraying the person that they lost or the thing that they lost. But if you think about it, for most individuals that we have lost, now I'm just talking about individuals that we have lost, when we're struggling to get over their loss, what would you think they would want for us? You know, if you could really ask your loved one, you know, what would you want me to do without you, right? That would be, I would think of the people that I have lost. Thinking about my dad in particular, my dad would want me to run the race, to move on. He would not want me to sorrow at all. I think about my grandmother. She would not want me to sorrow at her loss at all. She would want me to live my life to the fullest. And I think that that could be true for many of us. They want us to really live our lives to the fullest and not be sorrowful over us. It's us that is left with the sorrow, because we know that if they're saved and have accepted Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, according to my belief as a Christian, then we know that they are in a better place. So we're the ones that's sad because we're left here without them. Um, when you identify reasons for a person's inability to move on from a loss or a thing, sometimes the loss is unexpected. That will really keep you in a state, in the complicated grief state. It's unexpected. Nobody expected it. The loss is violent. A person murdered or killed in a car accident. Um, you can't move on. You're stuck. The loss of a child, that one really is a complicated grief concern. A person dying, being very young, that will keep you in the state of complicated grief. Having no one in your life, having no support whatsoever, no support system, that will keep you in a state of complicated grief. What helps during the stage basically is psychotherapy to overcome the barriers to the normal grief process and or coming to terms with the loss. What else can help in this state? Knowing Jesus. Knowing Jesus. He says in his word to cast your cares upon me because I care, you know? And now that we've talked about acute grief, integrated grief, and complicated grief, I want you to think about it from this perspective. Acute grief, you can look at it as being the wound. Let's say you fall down and scratch up your arm and get a deep cut in it. Acute grief is just like that wound. It just happens and it's painful. Integrated grief says the wound actually starts to heal. And think about it for real. I want you to envision this with me or visualize this with me. You fall down, you hurt yourself, there's a wound, and it's real painful. That's acute grief. Your loss is painful. It just happened. Integrated grief says, okay, some time has passed and now I it's healing. It's in this scar formation. You know how it begins to heal up and there's a scab on it, but it's still sore. That's integrated grief. You're able to move forward, but it's the sorrow is still there, the pain is still there, it's still hurt. Complicated grief says somehow the wound didn't heal, that the wound becomes infected. It failed to heal. The pain continues and it gets worse. That's the point that you seek professional help, whether that's a therapist, such as myself, whether that's a therapist, stop the shenanigans, right? Okay, whether that's a therapist or whether that's a pastor, whether that's some other professional help that you can reach out, psychologist, a psychiatrist, any of those will work for you. And the whole therapist thing, I like to bring humor. We don't always have to be so downtrodden and sad. This is a very serious grief and loss is very serious. It's very powerful. It's very painful. It's a pain that you feel like no other pain that you really have experienced in life. And so me bringing a little humor to it is all because I'm kind of cute. Okay, stop, right? All right. I want to talk briefly about the stages of grief. There was a lady, and her name is Elizabeth Kubler, and I'm probably messing up her name, Elizabeth Kubler Ross. And she introduced the 5 stages of grief. And those 5 stages of grief are denial, bargaining, anger, acceptance, and depression. Okay. When you are in denial, you basically are in shock and disbelief that the loss has occurred. When you are in anger, the stage of anger, that someone we love is no longer here. That's what makes us angry. Bargaining says it's all the what ifs and the regrets, which y'all stick with me through this process. I'm going to have something exciting for you about the what ifs and the regrets. Okay. All the what ifs. What if I had said this? What if I had done this? All of those are what ifs and regrets. And that's bargaining. Depression is sadness from the loss, and acceptance is being able to acknowledge the reality of the loss. And what Elizabeth Kubler Ross says is that we all cycle in and out of these stages. There's no rhyme or reason which one comes first and which one comes second, and that everybody don't experience all 5 stages. You may only experience one stage, but the point is, I think it's very important as a therapist that you acknowledge what stage of grief you have entered and which stage of grief you've exited, if that's a word, and just be mindful that you are in and out of these stages. The other thing that I want you to understand about these stages is that no two people grieve alike. No two people go through grief alike. Nobody gets to tell you how to grieve. Nobody gets to tell you what grief looks like for you. They don't get to tell you how long you should be in grief. They don't get to tell you what you ought to be doing during your grief and loss stages. It is personal and it is individualized for you, the person. It's a painful, powerful process. Um, we talk about the variability of grief. Not everyone experiences all stages. There's no linear progression to them. We just enter the stages as they come. And I think that, again, it's so important that you be mindful and aware of the stages that you enter into. Again, I talked about the type of losses that we can experience: the death of a loved one, the relationship breakups, the loss of health. That's one that we didn't talk about. Loss of health or physical abilities. Some of us have so many diagnoses, medical diagnoses that has caused us just to grieve. That I'm no longer able to do the things that I normally did. Um, the loss of a job or career, especially if you've had some longevity in a career and it closes for some reason, or the business closes, the company closes, or you're fired or you're terminated. Gosh, anytime, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, that's a loss. And you definitely have the right and will or can go through these stages of grief that we talked about: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Loss of a home or a lifestyle. What if you're used to living a certain lifestyle and that's kind of ripped away from you, snatched away from you, or taken away from you for whatever reason? You can grieve that process for sure. Loss of a pet. Oh my gosh, y'all. I lost my peaches and then I turned around and lost my pebbles. Oh, did I go through the grief and loss process? I was in denial for a long time. I was so shocked. I did not feel that this thing was real at all. Um, I was angry that they were gone. The what ifs was definitely a part of it all. I don't know why that light just went off. Let me see if it'll come back on. Distraction. Okay, there we go. Um, Also, I was just sad for a long time because those animals were in my house from little bitty puppies. That is a huge loss, just sharing my own stuff. And so, what I'm going to do, because we're coming close to an end, it's 27. We're going to stop it in 30 minutes, and we're at 27 minutes at this point. I really do appreciate you hanging in there with me, sis. I love you to capacity. I always know that you have my back. I appreciate you so much. Um, so, in addition to all that I've said, your grief and your loss is yours. Whether it's a person and it's a death, whether it's a person and the relationship has broken up, whether it's something sentimental, monumental, whether it's a separation, whether it's the loss of a pet, it's the loss of a home, it's the loss of a career. These things are grief and loss. Grief is painful. It is powerful. It hurts like no other. But you know what? There is hope. There is so much hope. Can I tell you that if you can just ride out the different stages? I hear people say, I lost my such and such 5 years ago, and it seems like it's yesterday. I hear people say 10 years and it seems like it's yesterday. You know, I don't think that we ever really thoroughly heal from the loss. However, we incorporate or we integrate the loss with being able to move forward. So, my encouragement to you in the last few minutes that we have is to know that wherever you are in your stage of grief and loss, just know that you are in the right place. You don't have to question if am I going insane? You don't have to question, is this the right, what, shouldn't I be over this thing by now? You don't have to question any of those things. Just know that you are in the right place, and this is just the season that you are in. Grief and loss is a process. It is truly a process. The more you're able to talk about it, the more you can move yourself forward. Does that mean that the pain stops? No, not necessarily. Does that mean that the grief goes away? Not necessarily. But the more you're able to talk about it, the more you're able to move forward with it. When you suppress it and let life, let Friday, it comes out in an inopportune time and is in disproportion of what's really happening. Now, that was a lot, But let me break that down for you. When you suppress your grief, when you don't deal with the fact that if I can use this as an example, that my uncle or my cousin no longer talks to me, right? If I can use that, no, my son, my daughter, they're no longer talking to me. If I can use that as an example, right? Just to say that, you know, the grief, the loss, it doesn't stop hurting me. I just learn how to live life moving forward with where I'm at. Trust in the process that that's exactly what it is, a process. And so just know that it is just a process and that you will get through it, and that I am going to always be available to talk to you and to help you navigate through your grief and loss. Being honest with yourself about where you are is always, always your best weapon. You know, for those of us that are in Christ, our hope is in Him, and that we lose someone or something, we will be with them again. We will be with the person again. The thing, we have to leave that up to God to take care of. All right, my friends, I certainly appreciate you being here today. I really appreciate you hanging in here to the very end. I hope that I said something that was helpful. I hope that you hit the like button and the share button. I hope that you put your email address in the chat, and I hope that you share what state you were in. All right. I appreciate you and I love you to capacity. Mwah, mwah. And I look forward to seeing you real soon. Take care. Bye bye.